Welcome everyone to the Atria Academy of Science and Medicine's Vanguard Symposium. Thank you for joining us today. So as you know, we're establishing a leading edge brain health platform here at Atria to ensure that we do everything possible to preserve what makes us human, which is our brains. Indeed, while our mission is to ensure that people's health span equals their lifespan, an essential part of that obviously is that of health span is brain span. And brain health has now become a primary focus of many leading public health and neurological organizations around the world, including the World Health Organization, the World Federation of Neurology, the European Academy of Neurology, and others. Because we have the knowledge, we have the technology, and we have the tools to objectively measure cognitive health. And we have a robust and a growing body of evidence, the bulk of which has come from our special guest speaker today, that we can optimize the health and functional performance of our brains and prevent, reduce, or at least mitigate the development of neurodegenerative diseases, most notably Alzheimer's disease. So as you all are probably aware, we believe, and while Richard, our guest speaker today, will probably have something to say about this, but we believe there's about 6 million people in the United States that have Alzheimer's disease. But there are about 47 million people who have Alzheimer's disease in its pre-symptomatic phase, since the disease begins in the brain, as you know, some 20 to 30 years before symptom onset. And it was Dr. Isaacson, our guest speaker today, who had the audacity to establish what I believe was the country's first Alzheimer's disease prevention clinic at Cornell. So I've been fortunate to have worked with Dr. Isaacson over the past several months to integrate Atria as one of the sites in this multinational, multi-center Alzheimer's disease prevention consortium that he's leading. And he's been instrumental in helping us think through and establish the brain health platform that we're establishing here at Atria. So Richard, it's a great pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for taking the time to speak with our staff, and we're looking forward to learning from you today.
Great. Well, David, thank you so much for the very kind introduction. I'm actually really excited about this talk for, I guess, several reasons. First of all, I'm privileged and humbled at the audience. Some of you I've met, some of you I've corresponded with through email, some of you I've talked to about a patient for the first time as of yesterday. But I'm really excited because the work that we've been doing for the last 10, 12, 15 years or so has really come a long way. And I'm really hoping that the future of brain health and the future of Alzheimer's prevention and neurodegenerative disease prevention can be advanced by Atria. And that's really why I'm here today and why I'm participating. Title of my talk is The Past, Present, and Future of Alzheimer's Prevention. And as David very kindly introduced me, I've started the first Alzheimer's prevention clinic to our knowledge back 7-8 years ago now. And I'm still an adjunct faculty at Weill Cornell, and we still have the Alzheimer's prevention clinic going strong. They also started the Parkinson's prevention clinic just before I left for family reasons. There's that route from Brooklyn to Boca that I heard about in Seinfeld. My family's from Brooklyn. I'm from Long Island, but I was in New York for a long time. But after COVID, I said, I think it's time to head further south because my family all moved down there. Another Seinfeld reference, Del Boca Vista. That's where I live, Boca Raton. I'm like literally down the block from Seinfeld's parents. It's that thing that I said I would never do. And now I live down the block from Seinfeld's parents. That's actually Kings Point. It's actually not called Del Boca Vista, but I'm literally ran by Kings Point this morning on my 5K run. So I'm going to try to give you a broad brush overview of what I think about the field. So I'll start off with kind of a cartoonish slide that talks about using someone's DNA and genetics to personalize care. And, the title of this talk is The Past, Present, and Future. And I think in the future, we're going to be able to take a person's genetic code and we're going to be able to personalize care. I see, Dr. Green, who's a pioneer in this area. If it wasn't for Dr. Green's work, I really don't think I could disclose some of the genetics, especially the APOE4 variant, to the patients that I talk to all the time. I think that every week and every month and every year that goes by, we are able to take genetic findings to personalize care. And I think that's the future, because different people are going to respond differently to different things. Whether it's Mrs. Smith, she has this set of genes and this unique set of risk factors through the perimenopause transition and these lifestyle factors that affect her specifically. But Mr. Jones, he's going to be different, and he's going to have different unique risk factors. He's going to need therapies A, B, and C, but Mrs. Smith, she's going to need therapies X, Y, and Z. And the goal here is to truly understand this and use DNA as a backbone. I think the future of Alzheimer's disease is going to be transforming genetic testing and personalized medicine, and really crafting these individualized plans. We've published papers, almost 40 now in the last 7-8 years, in the area of risk reduction for Alzheimer's, and really kind of the basis of what we do, from foundational methods papers to recent results papers. Had another paper looking at sex differences in our work that just actually published this past Tuesday. So what we're trying to do is deliver care in a real world clinical setting. And we're trying to provide the highest level of care. And I think the way to do that is through personalized medicine, precision medicine. But that term is a loaded term. I'm going to define that so we're all on the same page. But individualizing care, I think, is really the way forward. I think in the future, we're going to have lots of tracking. Going to figure out what the person's blood sugar is, and what that person's heart rate variability is, and what their exercise patterns are, and what their sleep patterns are, and how that correlates with brain health. And in the future, we're going to be looking at blood tests, and we're not going to have to do fancy, expensive PET scans, and we're not going to be doing things like spinal taps. We're going to be doing the cholesterol test for the brain, instead of looking at HDL and LDL and triglycerides and ApoB and LP(a). And I can wax poetic about all the fun preventive cardiology things that I like to dabble in, even though I'm a make-believe preventative cardiologist on the side. That would be my goal, but not there yet. But this is the future of Alzheimer's disease. The cholesterol test for the brain with amyloid and tau and the different parts of tau, and neurofilament light and GFAP and all these fun things. And this is the future of Alzheimer's disease. But this is the past of Alzheimer's disease. And this is my family. I mentioned Brooklyn. This is Flatbush, Brooklyn, May 1946. And it's my cousin Erwin's bar mitzvah. I don't know if anyone was there or knows anyone was there, but and these are 4 people, 4 of my family members that were diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. So for Alzheimer's disease, Alzheimer's is personal. We always have to talk about our biases and our disclosures and kind of what may bias someone's thoughts. And this clearly biases my thoughts. Okay, I took a flag and I placed it in the ground at New York Presbyterian in Weill Cornell, and I said, I'm going to talk about Alzheimer's and prevention in the same sentence. And I got a lot of flack for that. And I've been getting tomatoes thrown at me for a decade. I gave a talk back in 2007, and I said, man, mild cognitive impairment, that word impairment, that's a funny word to me. And let's talk about prodromal Alzheimer's. Let's talk about people at risk for Alzheimer's even before someone has symptoms. And I got a lot of side eye and I got a lot of tomatoes thrown at me. But what I've tried to do because of this bias is to think about Alzheimer's disease a little bit differently. So I want to take this picture and I want to go a little bit deeper. And as David said, Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative dementias actually begin in the brain decades, 20, 30, heck, 40 years sometimes before the first symptom of memory loss begins. And this is my Uncle Bob. He's the Italian side of the family, actually married into the family. It's my Uncle Bob. He's 31 years old. He's great. He's normal. Primary prevention, no symptoms, no pathology. I would call this stage 0. So he's doing great. But now he's doing good. He's got normal memory, but something's changing in his brain. He's 45 years old. And he has preclinical or pre-symptomatic Alzheimer's. And I think most of us don't think that. And then he had those senior moments. Oh, those are normal for aging, right? Mild cognitive impairment. Well, no, he had mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease. And then finally, at the age of 72, he was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease dementia. And when I was in med school, we thought people got dementia and that's when they got dementia, right? But no, this disease has been brewing in his brain for decades. So my goal of the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic and the risk reduction programs that we've worked on, and hopefully the goal at Dietary and the Brain Center, is to think about these things, to try to intervene much, much earlier. So in terms of general statistics, let's look at some data. If at age 85, 45% of people have Alzheimer's, and that varies. You can look at some studies, it's 38%, in some studies 40% or 42. But the disease first started in their brains between the ages of 50s and 60s, right? And we think of Alzheimer's and we think of dementia as a disease of the older age, but hey, 50s and 60s, that's like, middle-ish age, right? But then we move the spectrum a little bit earlier and we say if at age 65, 10% of people have Alzheimer's, then the disease first started in their brain in the 30s and 40s. Alzheimer's disease is a disease of middle age and early age. And the sooner we start thinking about it like this, I really believe the better we're going to be able to do. Because once someone already has Alzheimer's in their brain and the shrinkage, the horse is out of the barn, and we've really, missed a really important critical window of opportunity. So at the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic and Center for Brain Health, we try to follow a very specific method. And for those of you who have kind of been following this kind of field a little bit, I think there's different practitioners and clinicians and researchers out there that have kind of taken a different approach. And they may have, kind of thrown lots of vitamins and supplements and this and that, and talked about that or other thing, and published papers in various degrees of journals, and really kind of said, we can reverse or cure or prevent Alzheimer's. And I think aside from the three considerations here, I want to be very transparent and very clear that one of the tenets of the work that we do is that we promise not to overpromise. We tell people very clearly, I cannot in any way, shape, or form guarantee at all that we will have any degree of impact on your Alzheimer's risk. We're going to do every single thing we can, but we cannot definitively prevent Alzheimer's in people. But what we can do, based on the 2020 Lancet Commission, that 2020 Lancet Commission said, and I think it's even, the science has advanced since then, that 4 out of every 10 cases of Alzheimer's may be preventable if that person does everything right. And I think that's a statistic we can all agree on. So in the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic and Center for Brain Health, we take very, very kind of serious tenets of these key considerations. Number one, we have to stay evidence-based and safe. Most of the interventions that we work on and really implement in our program are based on randomized controlled trials, although many, probably 30, 40% at least, are safe interventions that are based on reasonable degree of evidence in prospective longitudinal studies, some epidemiological studies. But we do the best we can, and we try to stay as evidence-based and safe as possible. The last thing any of us needs to do is when we're trying to prevent someone from developing cognitive decline, the last thing we need to do is recommend something that's going to have any degree of harm, because we don't know if that person's going to get Alzheimer's disease. So we want to be very cautious, and evidence-based and safe is our kind of number one rule. Also, Alzheimer's prevention and the overall approach to brain health, in our opinion, is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not an algorithm. And I remember I was a med student. I was rotating at Weill Cornell. I think maybe that was before it was called Weill Cornell. It was just Cornell Medical College. It was the year 2000. It was March of 2000. I was rotating at Cornell, and Fred Plum, the former chair and kind of a giant in the field of consciousness and neurology, kind of lectured me in the hallway, and he said, medicine is not an algorithm. And I echo that, because I think a lot of people, whether you're at a cocktail party or whether you're talking to someone, you got 5 minutes in a clinic visit to talk about what are the things that I can do or you can do to prevent cognitive decline. Every single person is different. And this bespoke nature, understanding a person's individualized risk, the heterogeneity of Alzheimer's disease is something that we really need to consider when we're crafting this approach. And what I'll try to do today is go through this in terms of the approach that we take, and I'll review the published work in terms of our methods. So in terms of the background, I can spend an hour just on evidence, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to try to give a broad brush overview. And there are several now, many randomized controlled trials that have shown that cognitive benefits are possible through risk factor management. And the FINGER study is something that I think many people have heard of. Enlighten study, the SPRINT Mind study. I think most people are unaware that in the SPRINT Mind study, this is a study that just looked at more comprehensive or more aggressive blood pressure control. In a randomized trial, patients that were randomized to either the normal-ish blood pressure, which I would call borderline or high now, of 140s over 80s, and you actually randomize people to a more comprehensive or aggressive approach of 120s over 70s or below, That study was stopped early because the outcomes were so good. And in 3.5 years of work, even though that's not really even enough time to show a benefit in terms of converting to mild cognitive impairment or developing cognitive symptoms, just controlling the blood pressure from the 140s over 80s to the 120s over 70s had a decreased likelihood of developing mild cognitive impairment by 19%. So when you add in the finger study, which looked at dietary changes, exercise on a regular basis, cognitive engagement, as well as regular follow-up by a treating healthcare provider, and you add those multimodal interventions with blood pressure control, and then you add in the cholesterol management and blood sugar management and looking at nutritional factors, inflammation, metabolism, and then, of course, focusing things on genetics, there's so much more that we can do. And I really think that this multimodal approach is the way forward. When it comes to risk factors, I think most people are aware that age is the #1 risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. I moved to Florida about 6 months ago. Botox doesn't count as a intervenable thing, but it's kind of big down here is what I've seen. Family history is something that we really can't change. You can't choose your parents, but family history is something that is a non-modifiable risk factor. Past head trauma, loss of smell, that can really clue you in that something's going on. But in terms of the modifiable factors, things that you may have heard about relating to general health absolutely translate to brain health. And that's exercise on a regular basis, specific dietary patterns, single and multiple nutrients, cognitive engagement, sleep patterns, musical activity, social engagement, and stress reduction. And then there's a box around this area of cardiovascular risk. If we can really fine-tune blood pressure control, if we can really reduce tobacco use, especially in people with certain genetics, ApoE is a gene we'll talk about shortly, cholesterol management, and not just kind of based on the guidelines, because the guidelines, in my opinion, are a little bit, or maybe even a lot bit out, not really kind of ready to, I don't know, not really as advanced as they could be. And then blood sugar control and diabetes. These are things that fast forward cognitive decline. And just like when we're in school, we don't want to be average. We want to shoot for numbers that are optimal. And this concept of normal numbers within specific reference ranges versus optimal numbers in terms of our brain health is something that we look for. Our reference ranges are quite different in our program than maybe what a lot of folks maybe are used to from their primary care settings. So I think in terms of modifiable risk factors, we're going to look at reference ranges quite differently. We're not just going to tell someone to go exercise. We're going to look at their percent body fat. We're going to look at the distribution of their body fat. We're going to look at their muscle mass. We're going to look at the distribution of their muscle mass. We're going to look at lactate testing. We're going to really understand their VO2 max testing. We're going to understand their true relative strengths and weaknesses. And then we're going to put together a precision-based exercise plan. And it's the same thing for diet and the same thing for cognitive engagement. We're not just going to say, go eat a Mediterranean style diet, although that's a pretty darn good evidence-based diet. We're going to refine or fine tune because the area of precision nutrition in Alzheimer's disease is something that's evolving quite a bit. Okay, so what do we do and how have we shown that the things that we do may, and I'll say the word may and I'm not going to say definitive just yet, may actually impact outcomes. So our goal is to study everything that we do, and we're trying to translate prior evidence in these prior studies into real world clinical practice. And the type of research that we do is called comparative effectiveness research. We don't do randomized controlled trials. That's not something that I've really focused on in the last 10 years or so. I understand that the gold standard of care and gold standard of science that most people perceive as randomized controlled trials. But I think real world clinical evidence is something that is going to be the area that I focus most of my attention towards. And we do comparative effectiveness research by looking at the different interventions that we can do. And we do these in real world clinical patients. So all of the research that we do are actually a clinic, and we put these patients in a database and we follow them longitudinally over time. I use the term precision medicine. I like the term precision medicine. I think it does accurately really define the approach that we take. But I like to read the definition, the NIH definition, because I think some people think that the work we do doesn't really qualify for precision medicine, and that's okay. But my definition of precision medicine is an emerging approach to disease treatment and prevention, taking into account individual variability in genes, environment, and lifestyle for each person. And we take a person's medical history, their lifestyle factors, their physical exam, anthropometrics, which is body composition, percent body fat and muscle mass. We look at the panel of blood-based biomarkers, including genetics, and we also kind of really importantly look at cognitive assessments to truly understand kind of what a person's relative strengths and weaknesses are, even though they don't have symptoms. And we use all this multi-source information to put together a multi-domain management plan. So while we don't do whole genome sequencing on everyone, and while we can't really go to the ends of the earth with proteomics and metabolomics just yet anyway, and while we're not just yet looking at blood levels of amyloid and tau and whatnot on everybody, although remember the future, we'll talk about the future shortly. That's what we will do pretty soon. This is the approach that we take, and we try to do the best that we can using emerging principles of precision medicine. Before I kind of get too detailed, I want to kind of try to keep things simple. And the goal that what we've tried to do is try to keep it simple by using this little term called the ABCs of Alzheimer's prevention management. I think a lot of people don't really understand what Alzheimer's risk reduction is and don't even like the word prevention. And I totally get that. And I even in my own group, we have a 9-site international consortium that we're working with all over the United States, all throughout the world, from Sydney and McGill and Montreal in the UK. And then we have sites at Cleveland Clinic in Las Vegas and sites in New York, and Atria's, of course, coming on board, and Louisville, Kentucky, San Juan, Puerto Rico. And all of us think about these things differently. But whether you call it the ABCs of Alzheimer's risk reduction management or Alzheimer's prevention management, I think conceptually, this is the approach that all of our collaborating sites in our field, our emerging field of preventive neurology, takes towards both Alzheimer's as well as other neurodegenerative disease risk reduction. So the ABCs are pretty simple. We take anthropometrics like body fat and waist circumference and body fat distribution and lean mass, and we triangulate that data with the various blood biomarkers, lipids, inflammation, metabolism, nutrition, and genetics. And then we look at the various cognitive domains from memory to language to executive function, speed of processing attention, as well as odor identification. We do computer-based tests and pen and paper-based tests. And then we use the clinical history and physical exam that we hear from the patient, and we use this to carve out a multimodal management plan. And on average, people in our practice, in our research study anyway, got about 21 different interventions. Now that we've kind of learned a lot more since we published the paper a couple of years ago, we're averaging at least 23 to 25 different individualized interventions per person. And that's the magic sauce. We don't have a magic pill. We don't have a magic potion. I don't have any commercial ties to any supplement companies or vitamin companies or anything like that. I do recommend dark cocoa powder. I have no commercial ties to Hershey's or any of those companies, but we basically put together a plan based on the best available evidence using medical management, lifestyle management, medication management, and then we refer when needed to preventative cardiology, to primary care, and OBGYN. I talk to a treating gynecologist at least every other week, and that is pretty unique for a neurologist to be continually calling a GYN and talking about hormone replacement and talking about estrogen levels and talking about the critical window of opportunity through the perimenopause transition. But this is the type of bespoke plan that we deploy in our patients. And this is a paper we published a couple of years back about kind of you can go top down or you can go bottom up in terms of the ways that we treat people. It's really going to be impossible for me to go through all the different management styles and options, but we have targeted options like, for example, hormone replacement, trophic release factor, targeting amyloid burden. We do occasionally use a handful of supplements, for example, some that may address oxidative stress in certain people, again, amyloid burden, insulin resistance, and then drugs, equal opportunity. If there are evidence to some sort of intervention, we will, I don't, as a neurologist, prescribe cholesterol drugs, but I will work collaboratively with a preventative cardiologist to help. I don't prescribe for example, diabetes drugs, although there are certain classes of diabetes drugs that I think really can have an impact on brain outcomes and metabolism and even amyloid. So we'll really focus on areas like inflammation, oxidative stress, and amyloid burden. When it comes to systemic interventions, we talk all about sleep and diet and stress and exercise. And you may think that it's, okay, everyone, you've heard this all before and it's okay, go exercise and that's good for you. But again, I really believe that the personalization of each one of these areas, different people have different genes, and different people with different genes need to eat different ways. And, ketogenic diet sounds cool and it's, in the know, and people are all excited about it. Well, not for everybody. Some people have to be a little bit more cautious with too much saturated fat. Some people need to be cautious with intermittent fasting and time restricted eating. These are concepts that one needs to be cautious about. Sometimes we don't want people to lose muscle. And again, we try to individualize all of these different interventions per person. So to keep it simple, this is what we do. This is published in one of our methods papers. And this is basically an algorithm. If this, then this, if that, then that. And we tried to make it a non-algorithm, but in a research paper, when you're publishing a methods, this is kind of the example algorithm that we had to include. But in reality, in the clinic, the interweaving nature of all the different recommendations, the interventions that are given based on the different labs, genetics, and biometrics. This is complicated. It's a lot going on, but we have a method that we follow, and this is continually evolving. So I'm going to, next 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to try to just give a quick overview of some of the things that we consider. On this slide, we talk about different dietary patterns. And then we talk about different single or multi-nutrients. And just because it's on the slide doesn't mean I recommend it, but it's something I want to talk about. For example, the Mediterranean style diet, outstanding evidence, I think, across the field of Alzheimer's disease risk, although the Mediterranean style diet may work better depending on genetic findings like ApoE. We'll talk about ApoE shortly. ApoE is a gene that is probably definitely the most well-studied gene across the field of Alzheimer's disease risk. And you have 2 variants. You get one from mom, one from dad, and we'll talk about the differences. And the Mediterranean style diet, for example, has excellent evidence when it comes to people with that specific genetic combination where they have a variant, which is the number 4, having at least one or more of those. The ketogenic diet is a loaded question. I think we do use it or recommend it in certain cases, but not in all cases. Caloric restriction, also been really great evidence on eating less food. The ELF diet, eat less food, probably better for brain health. When it comes to single or multiple nutrients, a lot of people say omega-3s, they don't really do anything, and B-complex vitamins, they don't really do anything. And actually, they'd be correct if they were looking at people that already have dementia or cognitive decline. But people with pre-symptomatic, where they really have no breakdown of synapses, and people that have the ApoE4 variant, which is about 25% of the population has at least one variant, about 1% of the population has 2 variants. Omega-3 fatty acids are actually preferentially effective in people with the ApoE4 variant. So this is something that we follow quite closely. Omega-3 fatty acids are just one supplement that we potentially recommend, but vitamins, including vitamin D and folic acid and B6 and B12, are only used in specific situations. And we'll go through that. We do not ever just say, go take omega-3s or go take a B complex or go take vitamin D. We're only going to make these recommendations when the person has a specific need for these interventions. So when it comes to omega-3s, can give a whole talk on this, but some really amazing work from so many people, from Levy, Yurko Moro, and Hussein Yassin over at USC has really just been a pioneer in the area of really truly understanding what omega-3s and brain health is all about. And the take-home point here is that not all fish oil is created equal. The fish eat the algae have the omega-3s, so it shouldn't even be called fish oil. It's a misnomer. It should be called omega-3s. There's different types of omega-3s. There's DHA and EPA, and then there's ALA and ALA. I don't know what the heck that does for brain health, actually. And you could read the label and you could be getting a gram of ALA, and that's not going to do anything for brain health. So again, devil is in the details. It's a confusing topic. Depending on the type of omega-3s, depending on the person's genetics, we can target this as a modifiable risk factor. We look at omega-3 levels in the blood. We look at the genetics, and then we may recommend omega-3 fatty acids supplements, or even as a prescription drug. There are FDA approved omega-3s like Loveza. There's also Another one, Vasepa, which is a different version, which may or may not have as much brain beneficial effects. I think we've got to figure that out. But the take home point here is that it's a very confusing topic, but omega-3s may, in the right situations, in my opinion at least, be protective against cognitive decline related to Alzheimer's pathology. When it comes to B complex vitamins, they've studied this in people already with mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease, and there really was no benefit at all. However, people with mild cognitive impairment, in that earlier phase of cognitive change, pre-dementia, those people that had elevated homocysteine in the blood, only those people actually had a documented or verifiable benefit based on the VitaCog study. B complex vitamins in people with elevated homocysteine was able to slow brain shrinkage, was able to improve cognitive function. But here we go again. Let's talk about precision medicine. It only worked if a person had elevated homocysteine, and only worked if a person had adequate levels of omega-3 fatty acids in the blood. So here we go again. It's a puzzle. If this, then this, but check that and then do that. And here is really again, I can wax poetic about this with every intervention that we talk about, but B complex vitamins and omega-3s, I think, are really great examples of the precision medicine approach. Wake up and smell the coffee. Caffeinated coffee. I really think that, there's a lot of benefit here. Do we have the perfect randomized controlled trials? Well, no. Do we have an effect maybe more so in women? Well, maybe. Does it have to be caffeinated coffee? What about decaf? What does it look like in mice? All I can tell you is a few cups, possibly even several, earlier in the day so that it doesn't mess with sleep-wake cycles. This is how we try to balance the evidence, where the evidence for caffeine and coffee is still a little confusing and we don't have the best evidence, but I really believe whether it's the trimethylxanthines or it's substance X, which has been hypothesized to be basically created during the brewing process, a few cups a day earlier in the day is probably protective for Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, as well as other neurodegenerative diseases. Flavonoids, another example. Strong evidence from the Nurses' Health Study published over a decade ago showed that people that eat a half a cup of blueberries and strawberries at least twice a week had delayed cognitive decline for over 2 years. And that may sound great, but again, show me the money. Where's the randomized trial? Where's the evidence? This is prospective data. These data aren't clean. Well, close colleague of mine, Dr. Robert Krikorian, has really been a pioneer in this area, and he's trying to take the anthocyanins from blueberries. He's taken wild blueberries and found that they're stronger than non-wild blueberries. He's taken blueberry powder and he's put this into a pill, and he's tried to medicinalize the basic benefits of blueberries in people that don't eat them, because that's the way to perform an adequate randomized study, by truly understanding what the anthocyanin dose is. He just had a recent paper in Nutrients that really teased this out even more. So the take home point here is diet should always be recommended first. But the problem with studying diet is it's really tricky to study diet. There's so many variables. It's hard to do a randomized study on people eating blueberries versus not blueberries. But I really do believe that the flavonoids, the anthocyanins and berries are really an important tool. You don't need to eat them every day. The half-life is, a few days. So eating 2 to 3 times a week, a half a cup, blueberries and strawberries, that's what we recommend in our practice, especially people with certain biomarkers. When it comes to cocoa and dark cocoa powder, the data has been a little bit variable, but dark cocoa powder, especially in people with some degree of insulin resistance, and this is not just, a Hershey's bar that has more sugar and butter on the label than the actual benefits of the dark cocoa, but a company called Mars, which I'm sure you've heard of, makes a specific product that actually you can measure the cocoa flavonols. So again, is this perfect evidence? Is it ideal evidence? Not exactly perfect, but there have been randomized controlled studies using cocoa flavonols. The product is called CocoVia. I have nothing to disclose. And 2 of the studies actually showed improved memory performance, improved blood pressure control, I think due to the antioxidants and probably other properties, as well as improvements in insulin resistance. A more recent study actually did not show as beneficial of an effect. So the jury is still out. So the goal of our work, and I think the goal of the future, is to try to figure out how a brain healthy diet differs from a heart healthy diet, and that differs from an overall healthy diet in diverse subpopulations. And that's really an area of our focus. We'll transition now to physical exercise. Exercise is the #1 thing that anyone can do right now to reduce amyloid. And this has been proven in mice. There's our little mouse with the barbells and the treadmill, and a mouse can literally, through exercise, reduce amyloid by up to 50% in their brain. Humans, I think it's the same thing. If anyone says what is the most powerful thing a person can do to reduce their risk of Alzheimer's, it's not a pill, it's not a magic potion, it's not an injection or an infusion, it's exercise on a regular basis. Full stop. Exercise has been shown to increase the size of the brain, especially the memory center in the brain called the hippocampus. I know this may sound crazy, but this has been kind of proven now for over a decade. Kirk Erickson has kind of proven that it's nope. The stuff you learned in med school about once you're born, you never gain brain cells. Yep, that's not really true. It is possible to actually demonstrate increased size of specific brain region in people that exercise in trials. It's again hard to believe, but actually true. Musical activity, staying engaged. I can't really go through all the literature on cognitive engagement and cognitive training, but whether it's lifelong musical training or even midlife onward. I actually joined a rock band. We're called the Regenerates, music for the right brain, not the degenerates, the regenerates. But music is a way to truly build backup pathways. And we now have, pretty strong evidence and, great study in the neurobiology of aging, as well as many, many, many other studies that music, again, learning how to play a musical instrument is not going to prevent Alzheimer's tomorrow, but it's going to build backup pathways so that if you develop pathological cognitive aging due to Alzheimer's disease or other pathology, if you develop that pathology, you'll at least have some degree of resistance and you may perform better cognitively later. When it comes to stress, I was wrong about stress for decades. I thought stress was something we should just kind of, be tough, put on your thick skin, get over it, stop the silliness, take some deep breaths. It's going to be okay. Move ahead. And I was dead wrong. Neuroticism, rumination, is the number one type of stress that literally fast forwards shrinkage in brain regions related to Alzheimer's pathology. Stress absolutely accelerates cognitive aging. It absolutely accelerates pathological aging. I really believe in this now, and without taking those deep breaths and without managing stress and sleep and exercise and cognitive engagement and having a sense of purpose, and the list goes on, we have to attack Alzheimer's disease like a war. And stress is it's a really important tool in that fight. Stress reduction is critical. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is one potential intervention, has been shown to be tied to better brain and cognitive outcomes. So it's a regimented thing that we talk about to people all the time. Different types of meditation is actually shown to be outstanding when it comes to better brain outcomes. So what we did is we took all these data, we took all the evidence, and we took basically kind of a greatest hits, and we applied this in really the first study of its kind, where we, in the Alzheimer's prevention clinic, applied these data to our patients sitting in front of us. And I'm really excited that Atria is going to be deploying kind of like what we've learned over the last decade. Atria is also going to not just be deploying it, but honestly going to be making it better. I can't even believe it. The first time I talked to Dr. Ken Schubenstein, shouldn't say this because I'm supposed to be, brain healthy, but I was eating pizza at Delizia on the 73rd and 1st, which is one of my favorite pizza joints on the Upper East Side. Yes, I was eating a slice of pizza. Terrible. I admit it now. And I was wearing my CGM, and I could see how bad that pizza was for me, unfortunately, because I also may have had a garlic roll, maybe just one, maybe 1.5. We'll gonna move past this topic. But when Ken called me and said that they want to build the best brain center possible, and had the resources to do it, I got really excited because our study, we did the best that we could with the resources that we had. We did the best that we could with the personnel that we had, and we had 31 people at the biggest time point, but we definitely were resource limited. And I wish we could have had more resources, and I wish we could have checked blood amyloid levels and blood tau and all these different factors at baseline and 6 months and 12 months in addition to all these things. And I wish we could have had the wearables, wearing this Whoop strap, which is what I've worn for the last my gosh, it's been out for over 5 years now. We only had funding for, oh, there we go. That's good job, Petra. I saw you wearing one too. We only had funding for like 30 of these devices. I wish every single person could be wearing them. I wish every single person could have had a CGM so we could have, done all this in a little bit high-tech way. But I think that's what I'm really excited about Atria, and Atria having the resources and vision to try to, take Alzheimer's prevention and risk reduction from, the 1.0 level to the 2.0 level. That's what I'm really excited about. So anyway, this is our 2019 paper. And our 2019 paper looked at people across a large variety of ages. And I think some people see this and say, what? You saw 25-year-olds? That's crazy. We actually started seeing 40-year-olds and up, but kept seeing family members that were younger and younger. So we first moved the IRB to 30, and then we moved it down to 25 because we had a patient that she was 57 when she started having symptoms, and she was in our MCI cohort in this group. And then we saw her 25-year-old daughter, because Alzheimer's begins in the brain 30 years before symptoms. And that was her. And that was our patient. So patients aged 25 to 86 were recruited. In our study, people with a family history of Alzheimer's were the ones that were included, and they had to have no or minimal cognitive complaints. We did not have any patients that had dementia. These patients, thanks to NIH funds, we were able to get brain imaging, both MRI as well as amyloid PET scan, actually using PIB, Pittsburgh Compound B, as well as FDG PET, which is looks at glucose hypometabolism, which is a really great diagnostic test, even without amyloid. I really do learn a lot and derive a lot of benefit from FDG PET scans. But these people, for example, that were in our early treatment group, that means that they had mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's. They had mild symptoms. They were not demented. They could still take care of themselves, but they had amyloid in their brain. And this is a semantic point, but I call MCI due to Alzheimer's either early treatment or tertiary prevention of dementia. We're trying to prevent the MCI patient from progressing to dementia, if that makes sense. The prevention group was different, and we lumped. We got this is a tricky thing. We wanted our numbers to be large enough to have reasonable conclusions in terms of power. But our prevention group included people with normal cognitive function, mild subjective cognitive complaints that didn't meet the level of a mild cognitive impairment, which is defined by 1.5 standard deviations below expected for age and education. And then we also lumped the people in there with preclinical Alzheimer's. So these were people that had no or minimal cognitive complaints, but we found amyloid on their brain scans. So in this prevention group, again, get some criticism for this, but I'm still glad we did this. This was a primary prevention of dementia group and a secondary prevention of Alzheimer's dementia group. Primary prevention to me means, and that's the green part here, no symptoms and no amyloid in the brain. Secondary prevention means no symptoms, but amyloid in the brain. And these are the definitions that we use, but again, there's not really a consensus here. So we lump together prevention because if you as a practitioner, if there's a physician or a healthcare provider listening, if you have someone that has no or minimal cognitive complaints and you don't have the resources to get amyloid tests, it's okay because that person really lumps into this prevention group. So if you practice in terms of multimodal care, you can expect outcomes in that prevention group. And I think one day we'll tease this out in terms of are effects similar in people with or without Alzheimer's pathology. And we're really close to being able to do this. So in terms of the results, our results were actually surprising to me. People, let's start with the mild cognitive impairment group. The people with MCI due to Alzheimer's, if they followed greater than 60% of the recommendations we gave, those people at 18 months actually had better cognition than they did at baseline. And this was not expected. This was not a goal of the study. The goal was to delay cognitive decline in people with MCI. But in this sense, this blue line here, people with MCI took longer to benefit. But at 18 months of this precision-based approach, they actually had improved cognitive function compared to baseline. This is why our study did well. This is why our study was covered by all the major news outlets and all that kind of thing. This study was reviewed by the New England Journal. It got through peer review. It got to that magical Thursday editors meeting. And unfortunately, it was not accepted in New England Journal, mostly from what we were told due to sample size, and I'll explain that in a little bit, because they didn't feel that a single site study was going to be enough to change clinical practice. The study was planned to be a dual site study, but our sister site in Puerto Rico, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we talk about this in the paper, had 106 subjects, and then Hurricane Maria hit, and the clinic was flooded. The clinic had no power for 6 months, and all of the patients were lost to follow-up. All 33% of the patients, believe it or not, actually moved away from San Juan when they actually did end up coming back, years later. But by that time, the study was over. So in the MCI group, this is our kind of big finding. We not only were able to delay or kind of slow, I guess, or whatever words you want to use, that we actually did show cognitive optimization. This green line here, these are people with mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's. No matter, even now, these people did not follow all the recommendations. They followed less than 60% of the recommendations. They continued to decline. And in terms of the prevention group, these are people with no cognitive complaints generally, with or without amyloid in the brain, whether they followed greater than 60%, the blue over here, versus less than 60% of the recommendations that we gave, on average 21 different recommendations. So these people at 18 months also demonstrated improvements from baseline on the test that we use, which is called the Alzheimer's Prevention Cognitive Composite, which is a composite score specifically calibrated for people with preclinical Alzheimer's disease. And these subjects, and I can't go into the whole data set, but these subjects were compared to age and sex and education matched historical controls. So we didn't have control subjects, but we also had statistically significant differences in people when we compared to prior Alzheimer's disease data sets, one called the NAC data set, and one is the Rush Memory and Aging cohort. So aside from comparing these patients to themselves, we also compared them to really control cohorts is how we described it in the comparative effectiveness study. In terms of risk scales, we actually showed that risk scales also improved. Cognitive aging scores actually improved too. Yeah, lots of data we can show, but for the interest of time, I'll move on. So in our results, this was the first empirical trial in an actual clinic setting. This wasn't, a research study where people were randomized. So there's strengths and weaknesses to that design. But in an actual clinic setting, we showed that individualized risk factor management may improve cognitive function related to Alzheimer's pathology. And the secondary analysis showed that reductions in calculated Alzheimer's and cardiovascular disease risk scores actually also reduced, which was terrific, and also may have an effect on age-related cognitive decline, which was one of the secondary outcome measures as well. So this work has, you can publish a paper and it can get picked up and people can read it, but it really becomes true when it hits the Wall Street Journal. So when our first patient was covered in the Wall Street Journal, Alzheimer's prevention for 30-somethings with no symptoms. In 48 hours, we got 49 patient requests. I remember this vividly. We only had 50. It was one old patient and 49 new patients. Our voicemail got full, and basically for years since 2014, we have had a persistent, 3-digit, over 460 people now on the waiting list. Based on this sort of article, as well as others. When our results paper came out, again, we had just a plethora of interest. This study was our 2019 paper that showed that lifestyle changes can improve cognition. And again, that's the headline here. It's yay, exercise and diet and all that stuff sounds great. But people actually improved in terms of their cognitive function when they had amyloid in the brain. And we really haven't seen that. We really haven't seen that with FDA-approved drugs. We've seen slowing of decline with FDA-approved drugs. We've seen target engagement with the new amyloid drug, for example. But because the new amyloid drug, which I do use and I do believe in certain cases, that drug did not show cognitive improvements across the trials. Medicare is not paying for that drug, even though it showed reductions in amyloid. So this is a complicated area, but it's something that I think we have made some degree of headway with. just this week. This is just 2 studies that we on CNN, for example, 42 previously unknown genes for Alzheimer's were discovered. Just in the month of April 2022, the advances that we've had in the field of Alzheimer's were striking. This study will change the way we look at patients going forward. This study was our study, actually. We looked at the data set that came out this past Tuesday, and it actually showed that while cognitive improvements were the same in both men and women, women actually responded better in terms of reducing calculated Alzheimer's risk and reducing calculated cardiovascular risk too. So our interventions actually in some degree work better in women, both across cholesterol measures as well as metabolic measures. After age and genetics, like it says here, being a woman is the single most important risk factor for developing Alzheimer's. 2 out of every 3 brains affected by Alzheimer's disease are women's brains. And I used to say, we don't know why. And now I can say, I'm pretty sure I know why. And we take a really aggressive approach when any woman is just starting down that perimenopause transition. We will track this carefully. We will look at brain function through cognitive assessments. We will look at brain metabolism, and we are going to intervene and talk and have a collaborative relationship, if at all possible. And as long as I can get phone calls back, because OBGYNs are very, very, very busy and very confused when a neurologist calls about to discuss best practices on HRT. But the good news is as of July 1st or June 1st, we actually have our first OBGYN consultant that's going to join us 20% time. So we'll be able to better manage this ourselves. So I'm really excited about that. So when it comes to where we're at now and the future, we talked about the 42 new genes just found. We really believe that genetics are the way forward, and I actually don't. I think I've learned more in the last 2 years in the field of Alzheimer's disease than I have in any other epoch of my career. Honestly, I think I said this the other day, that I've learned more overall, not just with Alzheimer's, but I've learned more in the field of medicine in the last 2 years than I have in any other epoch of my training. And that's a big statement, but I really believe that that's even more than my neurology residency. I've truly learned more about brain health, brain span, longevity, lifespan, health span, and genetics and personalized care. I don't know if it was COVID. I was seeing less patients. I got to read more. I think actually in some ways it was COVID, because instead of seeing lots of patients, I was going very deep on certain patients. And for the first time ever in May of 2022, we actually did whole genome sequencing on patients. And we've only done whole genome sequencing on 31 patients. We've used 23andMe, for example. 20 patients in our cohort will actually provide their 23andMe data. They will, believe it or not, there's lots of people that order whole genome sequencing by themselves. There's commercial kits. And then they will say, hey, Isaacson and team, what do we do with this? And I'll say, oh, great, thanks. 20 million SNPs and 600,000 base gene parts. Great. Okay, Dr. Google, how do I do this? And what tools can we use to try to figure this out? And in that last 2 years, those 31 patients that have provided us with these genetic data sets, I've absolutely learned more in these 2 years than any other time period. So part of this, I think a big part of this is this ApoE factor. So I can probably give a whole hour talk about ApoE, but I just want to give a quick, maybe take a step back. ApoE is the most common, the most kind of well-studied gene. You get a variant of 2, 3, or 4 from mom or dad. So you either get a 2, 3, or 4 from mom, you either get a 2, 3, or 4 from dad, and people can be a 2, 3, a 3, 3, a 3, 4, a 4, 4, and about 25% of the population ends up having at least one copy of the ApoE4 variant. In our practice, about 40% had one copy of ApoE4, and about 11%, actually exactly 11%, had 2 copies of E4. And that's clearly an overrepresentation from the baseline population, because people with a family history of Alzheimer's are the people that come to see us. So there you have that overrepresentation. I'm not exactly sure how this all turned about, but I get contacted about ApoE and ApoE4 absolutely every single day. I think a big part of that was about 5 years ago, I flew out to San Francisco, and 23andMe wanted to kind of improve their reporting And now if you check 23andMe and you learn your ApoE, you'll see this video of this dapper looking neurologist basically giving the person an educational overview about what their ApoE4 variant means to them. And who knew that doing these videos, no hair and makeup, still upset about that. I was all tired. It was got in late that night. But who knew that doing these ApoE4 videos would literally, honestly, change the course of my professional career, because I then started getting this overrepresentation of people with ApoE4s. And what I've basically learned is that not all ApoE4s are created equal. People come in and say, oh no, I have 2 copies of this ApoE4 variant, I'm doomed. And I saw people with 4/4s that were fine and their memory was fine. And biologically, they looked great. And other people with 2/4s looked terrible. And I was extremely concerned about. So over the last several years, by basically scouring the data and looking at, different polygenic risk factors, there's some genetic variants that can kind of attenuate ApoE4 risk. There's some genetic variants that can fast forward ApoE4 risk. This mitochondrial genome, the haplogroup haplotypes, there are certain haplogroups that come from the mom that can attenuate, put the brakes on the ApoE4 induced risk. There are some haplogroups that can fast forward ApoE4 risk. So just using ApoE4 alone to predict risk, I think, is something that is really something that we should not do. And we should talk about epigenetic factors. We could talk about, TOM40 and ApoC1. These are genes that are, the upstream and downstream from ApoE. And there's confusing things here. I'm not going to get too far into this, and I have people way smarter than me that can explain this who are watching. But there's a concept of linkage disequilibrium, and there's a lot of confusing things here. But not all ApoEs are created equal, and we're really putting together really plans on how to address ApoE4 and other variants in clinical practice. And we actually, this is a first time I'm ever showing this slide. I'm back last Friday, 2 Fridays ago, at the Society for General Internal Medicine meeting. Great, actually, internal medicine trainee at Stanford who's just done a tremendous job. Her name is Maya. She presented this, and basically this is the initial data. We had 18 patients that gave us whole genome. We had 7 family members that also contributed data, and these are people that did their own at-home testing, and they said, Isaacson, what do we do with this? Team, what do we do with this? And basically over 2 years, we had a team of 6 people, small mom and pop operation, basically dive into their genome. And this is, I hate using case studies. I really dislike using case studies in the work we do, because I think case studies are overused in trying to give examples about medical practice. And I don't think 1 or 2 case studies here and there can be used for any degree of anything in terms of proof. But in terms of proof of concept, this case example was a 50-year-old ApoE44 man, an amazing guy. I think actually there's an overrepresentation of amazing thinkers and amazing people with ApoE44. I can talk about that, why that may be later. But this guy came in with off the charts cardiovascular disease risk. His brother had a heart attack in the early 40s. He had so many risk factors for Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. And we, through looking at his genome, through looking at a variety of things, we targeted so many interventions. And he went from, lower than expected performance on cognitive tests to, the highest degree of percentiles. He went from, I can look here, his ApoB, I guess when he came in was 78. That's not optimal, not terrible, but not optimal. His, LDL was, in the 60s. We completely dropped his cholesterol to, much better levels. His hemoglobin A1C was pretty good, but we found all these periodontal risk genes on him. We did oral DNA as a company looking at oral microbiome testing, and we hit this guy with every single intervention that we could based on his biological factors that we saw in his blood, and based on his genetic factors. His cognitive function improved even though he had no symptoms. His cardiovascular disease risk scores, calculated risk scores, plummeted. His oral microbiome completely changed. He had, he had terrible oral hygiene, but didn't really realize it. He had specific pathogens that are really associated with an increased risk of Alzheimer's in his mouth. We got rid of those, and he saw dentists, and we have a dental hygienist on our team. Like, never in a million years did I ever think we'd be looking at oral periodontal dysbiosis and having a dental hygienist. But in this guy with ApoE44, we got his, C-reactive protein down just by treating his, oral health. So this is just one of many, many, many cases that we are learning about in every single day. And I think what our goal is to eventually use more genetic testing to personalize care, but I think we still have a long way to go. We also have a company that we've been working closely with that's working on a digital therapeutic for Alzheimer's disease to try to scale this. And the digital therapeutic is an NIH-funded clinical trial that's starting up in about 6 weeks that actually gives personalized recommendations. And basically the engine has been built based on the evolving evidence and does some really pretty amazing stuff at scale because scaling our work is, I think, the most challenging thing because of the bespoke nature. And I hope Atria will be working with the company to actually be able to provide kind of the state-of-the-art personalized care using artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all sorts of logic that can really go, into the patient's home with them, and rather that complements the doctor-patient relationship. And the company's doing extremely well, and really excited about that. Finally, we are trying to educate the public as best as we can. And this is a course that's free. And if there's anyone out there that wants to learn more about Alzheimer's disease prevention, brain health overall, this is a course that we launched at FAU Medicine. Again, totally free. It's about 20 5 to 10 minute videos. It's me blabbing. Sorry, we couldn't get better talent, but they did the best they could with no hair and makeup that day either. I'm still upset about that. Got to work this into my contract. I guess I don't even have contracts for these things. I just go and start talking, and then someone brings a camera. But this Mastering Brain Health course is basically everything a person needs to know about brain health, aside from the the specific one-on-one doctor-patient relationship. So all free and available. So I think I wanted to definitely leave a lot of time for questions. So I'm going to wrap up. But I think before we continue, I think some people that hear this talk say, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Okay, this guy's team is trying to recommend all these things. And, okay, that sounds interesting. But I think it's important to at least demonstrate what it's truly like from the patient perspective. And back on February 23rd, 2016, you've heard of Alzheimer's support groups, and you've heard of people with dementia and their caregivers coming to a support group. This was the first ever, we called it the patient discussion panel, but this was the first ever Alzheimer's prevention support group where we want to highlight a couple of people to tell their story.
My mother has advanced Alzheimer's. I became really interested for myself, my future of my children, and the study of Alzheimer's in general.
We try to live the lifestyle that you recommend, and the foods that you recommend. We're trying to get ahead of things.
My grandmother was diagnosed in her late 50s. I had an uncle who was diagnosed in his early 60s. And then my father was diagnosed in his mid 60s. What led me to seek out Dr. Isaacson was actually my father's suicide, which was a couple of summers ago. He had been diagnosed at that point for about 4 years, and he was having a very difficult time with it, and he decided to take his own life. I wanted to take a more proactive approach to the disease, which nobody really in my family has done. It's been wonderful because I feel I'm learning a lot about the disease. I feel like I'm in control a little bit more. And so there's a lot of sort of quality of life things that I am working through and trying to incorporate into my life.
My mom started showing signs of cognitive decline, which began when she was 59 years old. For me, that was, very traumatic. But once the initial trauma subsided, I felt very empowered because I had this passion for science and health, and I stumbled upon a poster that was promoting a lecture about preventing dementia. And then a light bulb went off in my head that that's a really powerful idea, and I needed to be in that room for that lecture.
So that's what Alzheimer's prevention is all about, and risk reduction. It's not about giving false hope, but it's giving someone the ability to take control, and to take control of a disease where people oftentimes feel that they're powerless. And again, I want to make it clear that an important, really critical, key component of this approach is to promise not to overpromise. But I really believe that based on the evidence, may not be perfect evidence, may not be randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's our duty as clinicians to offer interventions to patients to help their brain health and to give them some degree of power in this fight. So I leave you with two questions. What change will you make today to protect your patient's brain health tomorrow, or your own brain health tomorrow? And which technological advances will you ask your patients to try to optimize brain and body health? Because I really think that those technological advances are really critical to success. So with that, I thank you. I'm just one small cog in a very large, internationally cogged wheel. And this is just a small snapshot of people that have really been responsible for this work. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard. Obviously, it goes without saying, it's an understatement to say that the work you're doing is crucial. Thank you for what you're doing. We're grateful to be involved in this research consortium. I think Atria is extremely fortunate to be involved, and our patients are as well, obviously. I've learned a lot too, Richard. Since coming here over the past 4 months, I've learned a lot from you. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you helping us get this brain center established and working with us on that. So very grateful for that. Thank you for coming today and giving us 2 hours of your time. And we'll see you soon. I know you'll see us often. You'll hear from us often, but we're really grateful for your time and grateful to be involved.